My brother moved his housewarming party to the day of my son's funeral, called his death a minor event, and our parents sided with him. But they forgot that I own the house where he planned the party. So he's in for a surprise. The first time I realized my family didn't care about me was the day my son was diagnosed with leukemia. It wasn't something they said outright, of course. It wasn't like my father, Robert, or my stepmother, Linda, called me up and said, "We don't care, Jonathan." No, that would have been too honest for them. Instead, it was their silence that spoke volumes. Their absence. The way they never asked how Alex was doing, never offered help, never even pretended to be concerned. I was drowning in medical bills, working late nights just to keep the lights on, and still, when my half-brother Mark called, it wasn't to ask about Alex. It was to ask for money. "Just a little short on rent this month, John," he'd say, as if he hadn't said the exact same thing last month, and the month before, and the month before that. I paid, of course, because I always did, because Mark had never learned how to stand on his own, and I had spent my entire life being told that it was my responsibility to hold him up. It had been like this for years, ever since Mark turned 18 and decided that working a real job was beneath him. My father had shifted his burden onto me. "You're the responsible one," he'd say. "You're the one who has his life together." The irony was that I didn't have my life together at all. I was barely holding on. I had been married once. Felt like a lifetime ago now. Back then I had dreams. A house with a backyard. A family that wasn't fractured. A life that felt whole. But in the end, all I got was a divorce and full custody of a sick child. My ex-wife, Rachel, wasn't a bad person. She just wasn't strong enough for this life. She left when Alex was 5. The words she said still haunted me. "I can't do this anymore, John. I love him, but I can't watch him suffer. I can't live in hospitals. I can't wake up every morning wondering if today is the day I lose my son. As if I had a choice. As if I hadn't woken up every single morning with that same fear clawing at my throat." Rachel remarried. She moved to a different city, started a new life, had another child. And Alex? He never asked about her. I think even at 5 years old, he understood that his mother had chosen to leave. And he understood that I never would. The only good thing to come out of the past few years was the inheritance from my grandparents. The house I grew up in. The small rental apartment that brought in steady income. And, most recently, the beach house, the last thing my grandmother left me before she passed. I remember sitting in the lawyer's office, staring at the paperwork, too exhausted to process it. The house was old, needed some work, but it was mine. Another piece of security for Alex. Or at least that's what I thought. The moment my father and Linda found out about the house, everything changed. "Mark needs it more than you," Linda said, the moment I mentioned the inheritance. "He doesn't have stable housing. It's not fair for one child to have so much while the other has nothing." I almost laughed at that, not because it was funny, but because of the sheer audacity of it. "You mean the brother I've been paying rent for? The one who refuses to get a job? That Mark?" Linda's lips tightened. "He's going through a rough patch. He's been going through a rough patch for 15 years. You don't even need it, John," my father chimed in. "You already have your own home, your rental income. You're doing just fine." I wanted to scream. I wasn't fine. I was barely making it through each day. I was watching my son fight for his life, sitting through chemo sessions, holding his hand while he cried in pain. And these people, my family, thought I had too much? "You don't know anything about my life," I said, my voice cold. "And if you think I'm giving Mark a house when I can barely afford my son's medical bills, you're insane." Mark wasn't even subtle about it. "Come on, John, don't be selfish. You have everything. I have nothing. You have nothing because you refuse to work for anything." His face twisted into an ugly scowl. "You always think you're better than me, don't you?" I exhaled slowly, clenching my fists. "I think I'm tired, Mark. Tired of carrying you. Tired of being treated like a ATM. Tired of being the only one in this family who gives a damn about anyone but himself." My father sighed dramatically, rubbing his temples like I was the one being difficult. "Just think about it, John. And because I was exhausted, because I didn't have the energy for another fight, I did. I thought about it. And in the end, I said yes. I agreed to let Mark move into the house. But I never signed over the deed. I should have known it wouldn't end there. They always wanted more. Even when I was drowning, even when I was losing the most important thing in my life, my family still only cared about what I could give them. Alex died on a Thursday morning. I remember holding him in my arms, his small hand clutching mine, his breathing weak and shallow. He had fought so hard, longer than the doctors ever expected. And then, just like that, he was gone. I don't remember much about the next few days. I barely slept. I barely ate. The world became a blur of condolences, paperwork, funeral arrangements. But I remember calling my father. I remember telling him the funeral was on Saturday. I remember the silence before he spoke. "Oh," he said, "that's a shame. Mark's having a housewarming party that day." I thought I had misheard him. "What?" "Linda already made plans," he continued. "We thought it would be best to support Mark right now. You understand." I hung up the phone, and I never spoke to him again. It was my cousin, Nick, who told me what happened next. Mark had thrown a party in my house, invited friends, played music, drank and laughed. While I was burying my son, my brother was celebrating. "He was bad-mouthing you," Nick said, hesitating, like he wasn't sure if he should tell me. "Calling you a loser, saying you gave up everything and got nothing in return." I didn't respond. I just got up, grabbed my coat, and drove straight to the police station. Because here was the thing Mark had forgotten. The house wasn't his. It never had been. By the time I pulled up to the station, my hands were steady. My heart wasn't racing. I wasn't second-guessing myself. If anything, I felt a strange sense of calm. The officer at the front desk barely looked up as I approached. "Can I help you?" "Yes," I said, placing the property documents on the counter. "I need to report trespassing." The police acted fast. Faster than I expected. By the time I got back home that night, my phone was already blowing up with calls and texts from my father. From Linda. Even from Mark. I let it ring. I let them all scream into the void. Their messages piling up, one after another. "Dad, what is wrong with you? You called the cops on your own brother? Linda, you're being completely unreasonable. We need to talk. Mark, you think you can do this to me? You're going to regret this, John. I swear to God." I didn't respond. I just sat in the dark silence of my living room, staring at the wall, trying to feel something. I thought evicting Mark would feel like a victory, like reclaiming something that had been stolen from me. But all I felt was empty, because none of this mattered anymore. Alex was gone, and I had no fight left in me. The next morning, my father showed up at my house. I should have expected it. I barely had the door open before he was pushing his way inside, slamming it shut behind him. He looked furious, jaw clenched, eyes burning with barely contained rage. "What were you thinking?" he snapped. I exhaled slowly, rubbing my temples. "Dad, I really don't have the energy for this right now." "You don't have the energy?" he repeated, voice dripping with sarcasm. "Then why did you call the cops on your brother?" I stared at him, my expression blank. "Because he was trespassing. He was living there, John. You told him he could move in." "I never signed over the house," I said simply. "That doesn't matter," he spat. "It was a verbal agreement. Do you know how humiliating this is? Do you have any idea what you've done?" I crossed my arms. "Oh, I'm sorry. Did I embarrass you in front of your golden child?" His face darkened. "Watch your tone." "No, you watch your tone," I said, my voice sharp. "Because you're standing in my house, yelling at me, when you should be apologizing." "Apologizing?" He let out a bitter laugh. "For what?" "For choosing a goddamn party over your grandson's funeral," I said coldly. That shut him up. For the first time, his anger wavered. He shifted uncomfortably, looking away. "That's not fair," he muttered. "No, Dad. What's not fair is that I buried my son alone while you were playing happy family with Mark." He clenched his jaw. "We didn't think." "No, I cut him off. You didn't think. Because you never do. Not when it comes to me. His silence was deafening. For a brief second I thought maybe this was the moment. Maybe he would finally look at me and realize what he had done. But then he sighed, shook his head, and said, "John, I get that you're upset, but you can't let grief make you irrational." Something inside me snapped. I took a step forward, my voice dangerously quiet. "Get out," he scoffed. "John, get out of my house." For a moment I thought he might argue, but then he saw it. The rage, the grief, the exhaustion, and for the first time in my life my father backed down. He muttered something under his breath, turned, and walked out the door. I locked it behind him, and I didn't look back. I knew it wasn't over. Linda was next. She called later that night, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Jonathan, sweetheart, we need to talk about this." I stayed silent. She sighed dramatically. "I know you're upset, but do you really think this is the best way to handle things? Mark doesn't have anywhere else to go." "He had plenty of places to go," I said flatly. "He could have gotten a job and paid for his own damn apartment like the rest of us." "You don't understand," she pushed. "Mark isn't like you. He's always struggled with." "Struggled with what, Linda?" I snapped. "Having to act like an adult? Having to work for once in his life?" She let out a slow breath. "I know you're angry, Jonathan." "No," I said. "You don't know. Because if you did, you wouldn't be calling me to lecture me about the man who stole from me while I was burying my child." She went quiet, and for a second I thought she might drop it. But then she said, "This isn't what your grandmother would have wanted." I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was the most pathetic thing I had ever heard. "My grandmother left the house to me," I said. "You want to talk about what she would have wanted? She would have wanted Mark to get off his ass and stop expecting me to fix his life for him." Linda clicked her tongue, disappointed. "You're being cruel, Jonathan." "No," I said. "I'm finally being fair." And then I hung up. Mark wasn't quiet for long. A week after being thrown out, he sent me a text. "Mark, you're going to regret this." I rolled my eyes and ignored it. Then, a day later, "Mark, you owe me, John." And then the next, "Mark, if I can't have the house, no one can." That one made me pause. I stared at the words on my screen, a slow, uneasy feeling settling in my gut. I knew Mark was a leech, a liar, a manipulator, but something about this felt different. And when I checked the security cameras on the property that night, I found out why. The footage wasn't crystal clear, but it was enough. Enough to see Mark. Enough to see the bat in his hands. Enough to watch as he shattered the windows, smashed the walls, tore apart the home that I had inherited. The home that was mine. I watched in silence, my chest tight, my hands shaking. And then, slowly, I picked up my phone. I dialed 911. "What's your emergency?" I exhaled. "My brother just vandalized my house," I said, voice steady. "And I have it all on video." Mark was arrested the same night. I didn't go to the station, didn't answer his calls, didn't respond when Linda texted me at 3 a.m. with a frantic, "How could you do this to your own brother?" I just sat in my living room watching the security footage on loop, watching him destroy what wasn't his, watching him take a bat to my grandmother's windows, her walls, her floors, the house she had loved, the house she had trusted me to take care of. And I felt nothing, not anger, not sadness, not even satisfaction, just emptiness, like I had finally run out of things to feel. The next morning, I got a call from Nick. "Dude," he said, voice still thick with sleep, "I just heard." "What happened?" I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. "Mark trashed the house." "No way." He sounded stunned. "I mean, I knew he was pissed, but Jesus, he really did that. I have it all on video." Nick let out a low whistle. "He's screwed." "Yeah," I said, voice flat. "He is." There was a pause. Then, hesitantly, Nick asked, "Are you okay?" I blinked at the question. No one had asked me that in a long time. Not after Alex got sick. Not after he died. Not after Mark stole from me. After my father abandoned me. After Linda tried to guilt me into submission. No one had asked. And I honestly didn't know the answer. I don't know, I admitted. Nick was quiet for a moment, then said, "You want to get a drink?" It was 10 in the morning, but I still almost said yes. The legal process moved faster than I expected. Maybe because the evidence was undeniable. Maybe because Mark had no money for a good lawyer. Either way, within a few weeks, he was officially charged with vandalism and destruction of property. Linda called me the same day. "Jonathan," she said, voice tight, "I hope you're happy. You've ruined your brother's life." I stared at my phone, wondering how she had the audacity to say those words out loud. "Linda," I said, my tone almost bored. "Mark ruined his own life." She scoffed. "You really don't care, do you?" I considered that, and then I said, "No, I don't." I hung up before she could respond, and for the first time in my life I didn't feel guilty about it. Mark lost his job. Not that it was much of a job to begin with. He worked part-time at some warehouse, barely showing up on good days, but still, he lost it. Apparently, criminal charges weren't a great look for an employee. Linda begged me to drop the case. Dad called twice. Once to demand I fix this mess. Once to say, "Mark didn't mean it." I ignored them both. Because at the end of the day, this wasn't just about the house. It was about everything. It was about years of being used. Being manipulated. Being made to feel like I owed my family everything while they gave me nothing in return. It was about Alex. About how my father had chosen Mark's party over my son's funeral. It was about finally understanding that these people, the people I had spent my whole life trying to please, were never going to love me the way I had hoped they would. And I was done trying. Mark pleaded guilty. I didn't go to the hearing. Didn't need to. The judge sentenced him to probation, community service, and restitution fees, which meant that, for the first time in his life, Mark had to work. Not that he took it well. "Mark, you think you won? Mark, you think this is over? Mark, I swear, John, you're gonna regret this." I blocked his number. And then, finally, I cut the last remaining thread. I went to the bank, closed the joint account my father had tricked me into opening years ago, and removed my name from anything connected to him, Linda, or Mark. No more family emergency withdrawals. No more unpaid debts in my name. No more financial lifeline. And just like that, they were on their own. Dad called 3 days later. I answered, not because I wanted to, because I wanted to hear what he would say when he realized I wasn't his personal ATM anymore. "John," he started, voice unusually calm, "I just checked the account, and it's closed," I said, cutting him off. A long silence, then a sharp inhale. "You closed it?" "Yeah," I said. "I did." His voice darkened. "What is wrong with you?" I almost laughed. Of course that was his response. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "I understand." Not, "I should have been a better father to you." Just anger. Just entitlement. "You really don't get it, do you?" I said, shaking my head. "You spent my entire life treating me like I was nothing. Like my only worth was in what I could give you. And now that I've stopped, you're acting like I've betrayed you." "You have betrayed me," he snapped. I let out a slow breath. And then I said, very quietly, "No, Dad, you betrayed me first." He had no response to that. So I ended the call. And I never answered another one. A month passed. Then 2. Then 3. I moved out of my old house. Sold the damaged property. Rented out the apartment. I cut my father out of my life. Linda. Mark. All of them. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt free. Not happy. Not yet. But free. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The silence was the strangest part. For the first time in my life, my phone wasn't buzzing with demands. No more calls from my father. No more guilt-tripping texts from Linda. No more angry messages from Mark. At first, it felt unnatural. Like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. But after a few weeks, something inside me shifted. I started sleeping better. I wasn't constantly stressed about unexpected expenses. I could breathe. And yet, I still caught myself hesitating whenever I saw my phone light up, half expecting another crisis to land in my lap. But the calls never came, because they had finally realized I wasn't their problem anymore. Mark, of course, tried to drag me back in. It started with petty revenge. He spread lies to the extended family, twisting the story so he looked like the victim. Mark, John stole the house from me. He tricked Grandma into leaving everything to him. Mark, I was supposed to get my share, but he got greedy and kicked me out. Mark, now I have nothing, and he's sitting on 3 properties, living like a king. A few cousins bought into the drama. An aunt even called me, her voice dripping with forced politeness, saying, "Jonathan, honey, don't you think you're being a little harsh? Mark's struggling, and family should help each other." I let her finish. Then I said, "Did he tell you he vandalized the house?" Silence. "Did he mention the police? The charges?" More silence. Then, finally, a hesitant, "Well, no, but then maybe you should ask him about that before lecturing me." And I hung up. Without my financial support, reality hit Mark fast. His probation required him to work, so he couldn't keep bouncing between side hustles and excuses. He had no savings, no fallback plan. And for the first time in his life, no one was swooping in to save him. I heard through Nick that he ended up renting a tiny, rundown apartment in a bad part of town. Linda and my father didn't take him in. Apparently, they weren't that generous when it came to their golden child. The irony was almost laughable. For years, they had guilted me into supporting Mark, acting like he was helpless. But when I finally walked away, they abandoned him just as quickly. Because deep down, they never actually cared about him. Not really. They just cared about what he could take from me. Linda sent one last message before she finally gave up. "Linda, I hope you're happy, Jonathan. You've destroyed this family." I stared at the words for a long time. Then slowly I typed back, "Me no, Linda. I just stopped letting you destroy me." And then I blocked her. For good. Cutting off my father should have hurt more than it did. But after everything, there was nothing left to grieve. He had already chosen Mark over me, over Alex, over everything. He had made his priorities clear, and I had finally made mine. I wasn't his son anymore, not in any way that mattered. The strangest part was how normal life became. I wasn't rich, but without my family leeching off me, I had enough. I finally took a break from work, traveled for the first time in years. I started seeing an old friend again, a woman I had known back in college but lost touch with when life got in the way. And slowly, painfully, I started healing. Not just from my family, from losing Alex, from all the years I had spent sacrificing myself for people who never cared. One night, months after it all ended, I got a text from Nick. "Nick, hey, just wanted to say, I'm proud of you, man. I know it wasn't easy, but you did the right thing." I stared at the message for a long time, and for the first time in a long time, I let myself believe it. I never heard from my father again. Not directly, at least. Nick told me he still talked about me sometimes, usually with bitterness, usually when someone brought up Mark's downfall. "He blames you for everything," Nick admitted one night. "Like, really thinks you ruined Mark's life." I had expected that. "What about Linda?" I asked. "She's the same. Still acts like you betrayed them. But between you and me," he hesitated. "She and your dad don't talk to Mark much anymore either." I snorted. Of course they don't. They had always loved the idea of Mark more than Mark himself. They wanted a son they could dote on, a golden child who made them feel important. But the second he stopped being useful, the second he became a burden to them, they dropped him, just like they had always dropped me. Took me a long time to stop looking over my shoulder, to stop expecting another call, another crisis, another betrayal. But eventually the fear faded, and I realized something. I was free. For the first time in my life, I didn't owe anyone anything. I wasn't responsible for fixing Mark's failures. I wasn't responsible for earning my father's approval. I wasn't responsible for carrying a family that had never carried me. I had spent so many years thinking I had to earn love. That if I just gave enough, if I just tried hard enough, they would finally see me. Finally love me back. But they never would have. And now, I didn't care anymore. Nick and I stayed close. So did a few other cousins. The ones who had always seen through the lies but never had the chance to say anything before. I reconnected with my old friend. She wasn't just a friend anymore. And one day, when I told her about Alex, about everything, I didn't cry. Not because I had stopped missing him, but because, for the first time, the memory of him didn't feel like a wound. Felt like love. A year passed. Then two. And one day I got an email. From Mark. Subject: Can we talk? I stared at it for a long time. Then I clicked delete. And I went on with my life. Final thought. Family isn't blood. It's not obligation. It's not sacrifice without love. Family is the people who stand by you. The ones who care. The ones who show up. And I finally had that. I finally had them. And that was all I ever needed.